too bad. Fresh.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. I'm Hans-Ulrich Obrist, I'm the Artistic Director of Serpentine. And together with me today we have our esteemed artists, the amazing artists Itzel Yard and Jakob Krutz-Dienst. And please give them a very big round of applause, a very warm welcome. And before we begin, I want to thank also the Tezos community, in particular the co-founders, Kathleen and Arthur Breitman. A big round of applause to them. And of course, Tezos, along with Serpentine, are committed to actually enrich creative knowledge within the blockchain space. And it is really this conversation that celebrates the mutual mission. This is our second year together, where we bring together important voices from the blockchain ecosystem. It's very, very exciting for me today to co-host this conversation. I want to acknowledge here the Dream Team, the Serpentine Dream Team, our CEO Bettina Korek, Kay Watson, Head of Arts and Technologies, R&D, Strategic Lead Victoria Ivanova, Curator Eva Jäger, Commissions Curator Tamara Clark-Brown, who is here. Bettina Korek also is here in Miami, as well as Associate Producer Rosie McVeigh and Producer Alex Boyce. A big round of applause. Finally, thank you to our artists for joining the conversation. I actually also want to connect this conversation to what we did last year here with Refik Anadol, Amelia Winger-Burskin, and Nancy Baker-Cahill. And it has been really interesting to see latest developments across the blockchain landscape, leaning into more decentralized application, into dynamic production, in particular, of course, generative artworks and audience-focused strategies like proof of attendance protocols. Our own work at the Serpentine celebrates this through projects like our upcoming Artist World, which is built on Tezos with Brazilian artist Gabriel Massan. This is an online commission. It's a game, but it's also going to be an exhibition. So it's going to be mixed reality. There's going to be a physical component, a virtual component. And then, of course, also the latest iteration of Future Art Ecosystem 3, which focuses on decentralized tech. And it's a printed book, because books are urgent, but it is also a file you can download from the Serpentine digitally, together with the previous 2 volumes of FAE. Of course, neither Jacob nor Itzel need an introduction. They are leading artists in experiments with art and technology. Of course, in the 1960s, we had Billy Kluwer, who started the experiments in art and technology, EAT, and we at the Serpentine wanted to start NEAT, from EAT to NEAT, new experiments in art and technology. And for us, it's incredibly exciting to have 2 of the main protagonists in this space with us today. Itzel Yard, IX Shells, is an artist I've spoken to before. We had an amazing Zoom conversation a few months ago. It was urgent to reconnect here for the first time with a panel, a leader within the creative code, generative art, and blockchain landscape, who shares our passion for supporting artists as co-founder of the virtual community Creative Code. So important, of course, in IXL's practice, this aspect of collaboration and the generosity also towards the community. Please give IXL's Itzel Yard a very warm welcome, another very warm welcome. Jacob is familiar with both of these projects, actually, the Future Art Ecosystems, and also our work with gaming at the Serpentine by being a contributor. We had also worked with Jacob on a virtual pavilion, as well as also a collaboration with BTS, where we brought together K-pop, art, and technology. Another very warm welcome to Jakob Krutz-Dienst. I now want to begin with the first question, and I also wanted to say from the get-go that please feel comfortable to ask each other questions, and we absolutely can also go off script and talk about anything you feel is important or urgent. I wanted to ask you about your thoughts and insights of where the current blockchain landscape actually sits in terms of NFTs, in terms of decentralized approaches, and perhaps also dynamic application. And also just simply ask you what both of you are working on at this very moment in time.
Yeah, so I worked in, with video game engines for like 15 years, and I'm newer to the blockchain space. But I think what's really interesting for me now is the more background tools rather than the kind of the image or the surface. So in particular, using blockchains for nature conservation or for something like decentralized land ownership, and how to digitize environments and find new ways of collaborating to make them and give access to them, and also work on creating utilities connected to actual environments. So that's where my head is at right now. And the other part is that I have this archive of sounds and textures and different species and plants that I've digitized over the past 10 years as well. And this library now, through blockchain, I'm thinking about making accessible and putting on the blockchain so other people can use and have access to this archive that I created over time. So that's where I'm thinking.
Thank you, Jacob. And Itsu?
Now that you mentioned archiving and documenting artwork, I think that's what I've been doing for the past 6-7 years without even knowing about NFTs before or blockchain. I was just researching on myself and what I was creating. And I think I found an opportunity to actually preserve my art, just like a museum may do, or I don't know, an archival process that can last for a long time. So that's why I got interested in NFTs, and also because it's a way to, to fund our own projects, to just have enough time to create, and being able to be free from the things that don't allow us to create art in prolific way. So before I was just doing a lot of generations and working with other people in the community. I'm part of different communities, like the software I use, which is Tezos Designer, which is a large community now. Before, it was very niche. I think it still is. We have a long way for people to get to know generative art as a career, as a process where artists can grow and technology can also grow through experimentation. So that's my interest on blockchain technology, because it can help us preserve this documentation process and the way we create art, which is by evolving and by creating things that weren't there before and extend it to others.
Thank you both so much. And I wanted to kind of ask you a little bit more about this question of the archive, because I think it came up in previous conversations we had, and you both have a very, very big photographic archive on which really all your work is based. And Itzel, you told me that in your archive there is a lot of nature. There is a lot of photographs of nature, and that's of course also true for Jacob, when you basically document forests and photograph plants. Can you tell us a little bit about this, about how your archives work?
Well, yes, I love photography. I think any moment when I see patterns like shadows or lights that are interesting, I'm trying to capture that. I don't want to lose the moment. Sometimes I stop in the middle of the street and I'm just like, okay, I need to take this. Yeah, before coming here, I was taking photos of this building that was reflecting the clouds, and they look so beautiful. And I think that taught me to see the beauty in everything, even if I'm living in a city, even if it's small like Panama or a big city like Toronto, where I used to live. I think that was my a method of finding a safe space within all of the changes, living in a city without my family, just by myself, understanding a new method of, a new way of living. Panama is very relaxed. It's a Caribbean, it's hot, and Toronto it's very cold. But it can be very beautiful too in the summer, spring, fall. So I just collected as many memories I could with photography, and I learned how to vent this data and turn it into art through computer science and understanding how different applications and languages and programming work. I think you can see a lot of like these patterns of buildings and nature in my work, even if it's black and white or colorful. It depends on the seasons. I think I was trying to adapt in the physical world, but since I couldn't get out too much, I will just go into my computer and create worlds that will reflect this. But honestly, most of my time was inside my room and the computer, like many of us during the pandemic too.
Yeah, I think this form of personifying the data, and that's what I really like about your work too, and looking at it, like the sense of, because in blockchain in general, the big change where you have like a big data structure that influences everybody, but then how do you personify that as a human at a more physical, emotional, at a very personal level? So I think that's maybe something we share in that way. Like with my own work, I go to these ecosystems with collaborators, and we digitize. It's basically a body moving through a landscape over like 2 months. And through those 2 months, there will be generated an archive of data. And this data then becomes personified in order to turn it into an artwork. So that's what I also really like about your approach to your images and your work. Like, because if you work with something, on a blockchain or using big data structures and generative, this can also become very cold. But then by imbuing this kind of human dimension into it, I think this is a big difference in what I'm fascinated with a lot of artists working in blockchain too, is like a personification of what was before more like colder, separated, large data structures. So I think this is a big change of how to, perceive and access an archive.
Thank you. Another aspect which is important in both of your practices, of course, interdisciplinarity and collaboration. Italy, you've spoken at great length with regard to aggregating kind of technical and also production-based knowledge via online community exchange. So not just focusing on creative outputs, but also the process and following the journey of others, that are involved in that and may inform your own. And of course, Jacob, for you, there is also a very important interdisciplinarity in the practice and exchange with science. Can you both talk a little bit about this fear to go beyond, the sort of attempt to go beyond the fear of pooling knowledge, to sort of find ways of pooling knowledge through collaboration?
Let's do that out.
I'm rephrasing that last part, like the field of collaboration.
To go beyond the fear of pooling knowledge, to kind of break down silos and bring practitioners from different fields, together in these online community exchanges you have.
Yes, I think that goes back to nature. At the beginning of NFTs and all of this craze, I think I started comparing it to the way mushrooms or fungi will grow. I'm used to compare my art and like the evolution of humanity to the evolution of, or the connections that mycelium networks create. I think we're in a group and we start growing and helping each other grow. We're also reflecting the natural world. And NFT proved that, how we can create currencies out of using our imagination. I've read a lot about different theories of what currencies are, a medium of trust. And I think NFTs became a medium of trust between people that were in need, that were kind of desperate, and also at the same time curious. There's different kind of peoples in these communities. But I think what is predominant now is the curiosity, because right now I think things have slowed down and are now functioning at a healthy rhythm. And I think that's what we needed. We needed balance and trying to see what we're building before even enjoying it. I think there's so much more to build, but this will as long as we keep reflection nature, I think this will keep evolving. It's not gonna stop. It's part of us. That's why I told you the other day, like, I think machines are natural. It's just part of us. Like, we didn't create this out of nowhere. There's something, I think there's memories that we unlock with certain processors or experiments we do with our own brain that can bring up these new ideas, and not only the ideas, but the need and the motivation to keep inventing.
And Jacob, and maybe also it would be interesting to hear from you in addition then if you also think that machines are natural.
Yeah, probably everything is natural, I think. It's physical reality in front of us. I don't work so much with like a virtual or real divide in that sense. And with collaboration, it's like, so I started working more in video games and then went into the art world, and now I work with like composers, authors, field biologists, natural historians, and bring these groups of people together to create kind of environmental instruments, is how I think about it more and more, like these psychological spaces where people have a very rhythmic, emotional experience psychologically that then through the technology, through the exhibition, in VR or game, but the kind of emotion of that and the psychology of that comes from a natural environment, so outside any of this reality we're in right now. So for me, it's becoming very clear that what I want to do is to bring in sensibilities that are also just how I feel and how I kind of am as an artist, that I also feel in danger of going extinct now. It's not just environment, but it's also, ways of singing, ways of moving, ways of looking, ways of collaborating beyond the technology as well. So for my practice, it's like, how do I get a scientist who spent 30 years of his life looking at a swamp? How do I get him to show something personal about this environment beyond my own vision? This kind of goes beyond any structure and technology, because it becomes, you have to speak, you have to become friends in order to learn from a perspective outside of your own field. So this is where I've kind of put my work. It's at the periphery of different fields, and through different peripheries, something new can happen. So this, to me, is what I find interesting working with technology and art and everything. It's where at the edges of different fields, when they kind of like mix together, rather than being in the center of an existing field. So that's like my philosophy on that.
Thank you both so much. So this is end of part one, the prelude to this conversation. And I want to now kind of focus in the main part of the conversation and that's also the reason why I thought it's so exciting that we can bring you both here together. And we always believe at the Serpentine that panels have to produce reality, and it's about making new introductions. And the two of you had never met, and we saw so many parallels in your practice. We saw it already and could hear it when you both talked about the archive. But another sort of common point is, of course, that you both have this very deep connection to video games, to gaming. And Itzel, you told me that your practice grew out of that. And Jacob, when we met for the first time, you weren't at all working in the art world at that time. You were in the world of actually developing video games. And at the moment, we are working on this game at the Serpentine with Gabriel Massa, and we think it's incredibly fascinating how actually also that space of blockchain and gaming is more and more coming together. In 2021, 2.8 billion people, that is a third of the world population, have actually played video games, average age kind of mid-30s. And so what is a niche pastime has become one of the biggest phenomena of our time. And in a way, video games are to the 21st century what movies were to the 20th, and maybe novels, no one could say, to the 19th century. Now, it's interesting also to revisit Anna Anthropy's book, The Rise of the Video Game Dynasty, from 2012. This book came out exactly 10 years ago, where Anna Anthropy wrote, what I want from video games is a plurality of voices. I want games to come from a wider set of experiences and present a wider range of perspectives. I can imagine, and the writer says you are invited to imagine with me, so you're all now invited to kind of imagine with Anna Anthropy a world in which digital games are not manufactured for the same small audience, but one in which games are authored by you and me for the benefit of our peers. And we can, of course, see that more and more artists, of course, and there has been a long history where artists bring video games into their practice. We think about Rebecca Allen, artists since the 70s, 80s have done that. But now we see a moment where artists kind of inventing their own games. And we can see also with a practice like Sarah Friend, in Berlin, Sarah has been making site-specific work for platforms and protocols where software is a kind of a sculptural medium, has been working since 2017 with ClickMine, a kind of a pre-CryptoKitties kind of blockchain-based game where players are enabled to mint a token with each of their clicks. So each time a click happens, basically it leads to an NFT. Of course, Sarah Friend has also experimented with NFTs of generosity. So if that NFT isn't given to a friend or to someone else, it just simply disappears from the wallet. So it only exists, if people are generous. And Sarah Friend also talks about that coming together, of blockchain and gaming. So to cut a long story short, I wanted to ask you to tell us about your relationship to video games, how you kind of came to video games, what are kind of your favorite video games, and if you would agree that there is a coming together now of blockchain and video games.
Yeah, I love video games. So for me, it's I started modifying video games as a teenager. So for me, it's just become like a natural medium because that's like 20 years ago. So it's like a natural way of expressing. And what I find really exciting with the project that Serpentine's doing with Gabriel now is this kind of peer-to-peer development, and where a really exciting part of like using the foundational part of blockchain is in like the crediting as well, like that you can track each developer's participation. You could maybe have like a singer, a performer make something for one game, and through blockchain you can start appearing somewhere else, and you can like track it over time. So I think that is tremendously exciting because in traditional game development so that's why I left that world and went more into art world. You are typically working for like one director and designer, and then it's these huge productions, so it's a lot of money at stake and everything. So a few people design it, and then they outsource, and it's kind of like come back and produced. So what's really exciting with Gabriel's work, I think, is this more like dynamic, flattened hierarchy of development, and that seems to be like a prevalent narrative that's going on in blockchain. So I'm extremely excited on the creator side to see how that unfolds, not just on more like a consumer, like a market orientation, but how you can track these developments as well and collaborate openly that way.
Thank you, Jacob. And Lisa?
Oh God. Okay. For me, games are basically life. Literally, they're life. That's the way we learn, we train ourselves to do certain tasks in the real world and behind a computer or a console. And I remember clearly the moment it clicked that I could learn how to multitask by playing games and like making my brain being like different parts at the same time, doing quests, meeting people online, creating friendships, communities, collecting items, having that desire to know more of what was within the game, and that just going on levels and also understanding more about myself, having fun while I was doing it. And I think that's the way I've been living life ever since. I think I love learning new things all the time. Sometimes I feel like I still have that sponge response to like new things that are interesting to me. For example, I learned how to drive recently, like 3 months ago, and I'm like supposedly a good driver. I'm good. I think I'm good. And that's the same thing with NFTs. I learned by watching other people and understanding repetition and how we are living in a constant programming running in the background of like social media like Twitter or Instagram or other types of social media. And social media also exists inside games. Like, for example, there's a game called Tibia, which is like one of the first MMOs. It's an 8-bit game with like really poor graphics, but it's difficult. And it makes you want to be better at it and skill. So we used to gather in this center, in the center of the game, where we have like several banks, and we will put our items in, and we will talk to each other and try to negotiate and exchange things and plan how to go on a quest that only happened every 5 years for one of these big bosses. So I think that trained me to be, in a certain way, someone that can role play and become adaptive. Like, for example, like this past year, I learned how to do things that I wasn't doing before, like being a professional artist, travel and like get to know people and respond to requests and be more responsible in that sense. And before I was just lost in my own world on my computer and sharing art for the love of it. I still do it, but I think right now I have the responsibility of keep taking care of my family. So the change came for me. And that's how it has influenced me for the past years. You mentioned some of my favorite games. So that was Tibia. There's all kind of role-playing games, but I mostly love from like really good graphics. They have to be interesting or they're either 8 beats or really good graphics like Witcher 3 or anything that CD Projekt makes is good. Even if it comes with bugs, I think that they're good at fixing these bugs. And I love glitches, so I can live through it. Mostly role-playing.
Thank you. And Jacob, some more of your favorite games, maybe?
Yeah, there's an endless list. I like this game called Apsu. So it's like a game where you go into this underwater world, and the creators were very inspired by like Egyptian temples and mythologies. And what I also really enjoy about that game, and the reason I like working in the art world versus like a gaming world, is I don't think of it as like game as in objective or from, you know, like games, like a board game, but as something you play as like an instrument. So it's like instead of playing to achieve, to overcome goals, to this like rational technology paradigm, I think of it more like playing music. So then it's about rhythm, it's about emotion, it's about learning to be part of something that gives you like feedback, but that feedback doesn't need to be so like point and click or goal oriented, but it can be emotional, it can be extremely psychological. So for me, it's like if I am sort of like this winter, I was like a bit depressed, and then I went to digitize this glacial cave and turn that into a video installation and like an interactive space. So it's like it became like a mental refuge, and it provided like another sensibility for at a very like psychological dimension. And I think games have this absolutely incredible interdisciplinary field going on. So, you know, like some of the best composers or musicians, they would now, you know, make things for games, or performers, more actors are going into games. But the gaming world still have this paradigm by large of overcoming objectives and so on, where like, you know, in the art world, you can kind of do whatever you want. And that's why I think like at the edge of the art world and games, this is extremely interesting. And likewise, I think there are more games being made that could easily show, you know, like at Serpentine, which is exactly what you're making with Gabriel. So it's like these peripheries right now, I find really, it's like a cultural shift of an expectation of the medium. And I think it's moving away from just being a game in like that goal-oriented way.
One question which came to my mind in relation to games and your work and the connection is a question I often ask artists is about the unrealized project, you know, because we know a lot about architects' unrealized projects because they publish them, and we know almost nothing about artists' unrealized projects, and the scope or range of the unrealized can be wide. Projects can be too big to be realized, too expensive to be realized, too time intense. to be realized. It can also be censorship. Important, as Doris Lessing always told me, also projects which have been self-censored. No projects we want to do but haven't dared to do yet. So I was very curious in relation to this idea of the inevitability maybe of the world of blockchain and NFT and the world of gaming coming together. If you both have kind of unrealized games or dreams for games.
Now that you mentioned games that are emotional, I just remember another game that I really like, which is Gris, GRIS, from a developer in Barcelona. The game is about learning how to grieve. It goes through different stages of grief, and it starts with really gray landscapes, but beautiful, and then it turns into different colors. And it's just something that helped also during the pandemic. Like, I played in December, and it was just something that get me going, and also made me get loose and cry, and then come back to my center of being focused in something, but also releasing all those emotions. And about unrealized dreams, I think often the place I live in Panama, which is a developing country, but it's very centralized. Most of development is in the city of Panama. Everything else is abandoned, basically. Like the family from my father's side come from Colón, which is mostly African American culture, close to Jamaica and Barbados. And it's very abandoned. The city looks horrible. There's no landscape design. I think people just get depressed by looking around. And we do have beautiful beaches and beautiful, the nature there is almost untouched. So when I think of games and cities, because I used to study architecture in Toronto, I didn't finish, it was too expensive. But I did sneak into classes from my partner at the time for urban planning, and I was really interested in learning how this environments around you shapes you as a human. And I think if we bring sort of games to cities that are like this, that they are not used to go to talks like this, they are not used to watch a documentary and try to change their life through that, but maybe through something that can actually stimulate their progress, like a game does. It's fun, and at the same time it teaches you a different reality. Maybe that can start changing a city like that, mixing urban planning with a game in underdeveloped countries. That could be an unrealized dream.
Thank you so much. Jacob?
Yeah, Gris is a really good game, I agree. I mean, there's a lot of unrealized projects. I think I'd like to make a virtual opera, or work with performers or craftsmen from worlds of expression that are also vanishing, that are not being documented or represented and also going away. I work with that. But in blockchain specifically, I've been thinking of this idea really of working with nature conservation on decentralized land ownership and digitize it and kind of rewild it forever, and find a way of really using the law and connect it to the smart contracts of blockchains. So 5,000 people could collectively own a piece of land that can never be touched by a human, but it could be basically turned into a video game, right? Metaverse, like a virtual world, and kind of see if there's something in that field that I find really exciting. And there are different companies and people already working on this, and new ways of rewilding and using metadata to do agroforestry, reforestry at scale. So that's something there that's really exciting, but I think the legal part of it right now is still developing. But when that would be ready to do something like that, I think that would be really quite amazing, and work with Nature Conservancy. And actually in Panama, I'm in contact with the amphibious protection kind of agency, and they are trying to turn the golden frog, that's the only 50, they think there are 50 left in the world in the forest, they're going extinct, and they're trying to turn that frog into a symbol, an icon, and this is sort of something that could be quite interesting on a blockchain, to turn it into an icon to to help the conservancy of the frogs in Panama.
I think that the golden frog is already a symbol in Panama, like orchids and trees, and like we have Panama means abundance of trees and forests and water. That's our native name, Panama, and I think like we already use the golden frogs. Like there's bars called golden frogs and stuff like that. But yeah, I am aware like it's going extinct. Also, as the iguanas, which are eaten by locals, and they eat even the eggs and turtle eggs. I think it's really important to like spread the word around the world and develop countries that can possibly come help. But I feel like teaching locals how to do it themselves is also important, because we can't depend on the outside world, our whole existence. And that's what's been happening there. Like people comes and plant-based, and like and then they profit out of trying to save a country. But in the meantime, the locals are ignorant of what's going on, and they don't have employment, education, or they don't understand like the technology that's coming in. They're just working for others. I think it's just important to create leadership within locals to, like, if that's going to happen.
Thank you both so much for these great answers. Now, another question which came to my mind this morning, because obviously, you know, it's the 20th anniversary of Art Basel Miami, and I came here 20 years ago, and actually late at night, you know, after a dinner, saw in one of the hotels in Miami sort of kinetic relief by Jesus Rafael Soto, and you know, the late visionary kinetic artist. And I wasn't really aware, you know, I mean, obviously now is art history, but at that time he was still alive, and also not so present in a way. So I wasn't really aware so much of the history of his work and if he would still be working. So I made a little research online and actually found out that he lived in Paris. And I lived in Paris at the time. So I kind of rang him up and directly went, when I came back to Paris, to his studio. I kind of recorded this long interview about, you know, and obviously he's one of the pioneers of kinetic art, you know, something which I think is relevant also for your work, Itzel, and also for Jakob's work. This idea, no, that an artwork is dynamic, and we can even say, I mean, you both talked a lot about living organisms. You talked about plants, about animals, you talked about, and I think that's one of the biggest changes which is happening with digital art, is that the sort of status of the artwork is changing. I mean, that was when we started the digital project at the Serpentine, I suddenly realized these works are like living organisms. They don't stop with the end of the exhibition. They continue to evolve and change. And it was interesting, Soto in that conversation with me said, you know, kinetic art, the idea is that the artwork is kind of alive, no? And he also referred, you know, to Tanguely's machine. You can look at Tanguely's machine, very low tech, but they're kind of sort of, you know, alive in a way. So I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about that, the sort of almost ontological change there is towards an artwork as a living organism, because that seems to be very present in both of your works, and another reason why we wanted to bring you both together here.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of why I really I'm so inspired and love using these video game technologies, because they're malleable media, so you can transform them and change them forever. So when I make work, for example, it's like there are collaborators I work with, and there's a landscape, and it can be video one day, it can be VR the next. And actually with Serpentine, last year for the Artist World project, we took an older work of mine, which is like virtual island. It's like a real sinking island, and I made this 7 years ago. And then we kind of revived the project and turned it into this multiplayer live reading. So then I invited different writers I know to read from their poetry on the virtual island, and then this was live streamed. So what was first like a video work, then it became a VR work, and then it became like a speaking arena during the lockdown. So it like became something different. So this is that's why I really like video games, but also why I've kind of like slowly moving into more like blockchain area, because a lot of it traps the format. There, you know, there are two sides to a sword or a coin or something. You know, it's a eternally stored data package, so that cannot be reworked again once you do something. and it's on chain. But that's what I find the beauty about video games, is that you can eternally edit it. So that's like the, yeah, I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Well, that's a broad topic. I think it needs a lot of research, but I think most of generative art is about simulating our surroundings and physics. For example, like there's a lot of science projects, or for example, let's say NASA will present their new researches with a simulation of what's going on in the universe or what's going on in a satellite, and they have to program it for it to look like it's what's happening in the physical world. And I think combining science and generative art has created these pathways to explore things like blockchain technology, cryptography, and languages that can evolve to help you create dynamic artworks. You know, for example, there's many projects on chain that will change over time using data from the weather or from phases of the moon, or like anything that you can imagine can be turned into data and be used in the programming languages that the blockchain uses, like Solidity. These are programs that I've been trying to learn myself. They're pretty difficult in a way, but it's pretty similar to the other programs we use. It's just a different language. It's something that I'm definitely interested about because I'm always trying to simulate like spaces, like the circle right here, or like the level of light in my head, or I'm not sure like how tall this table is. And if we teach more people how to create generative art, I think like that will spread the curiosity, and it will accelerate the researchers that we already have. Like I don't think we have enough people in science, or I don't think we have enough people interested in the future. And the more we have, the faster we will get to the point where like all of this research will accelerate and we'll see it sooner than in what we predict right now, like 50 years from now, for example. I think also generative art is like a mirror to what we do. And in a philosophical sense, I think I often see matches of or coincidences in data. Like I'm just scrolling through the feed and I see the same colors in different posts from people from different regions. And that's the algorithm reading this data and putting it together so we get attracted to this and we don't stop scrolling. And I see it often, and now I see it just walking around, and I start connecting colors that are in a certain room. And that's because these algorithms that we use in this, and the extension of ourselves, which is our phones, it's teaching us how to read data the same way a machine does. And imagine in 10 years from now how we're going to be reading our surroundings. We're going to be almost like cyborgs, right?
Thank you, Jacob.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, for me, the whole thing is I've worked in, so, you know, when I started making virtual worlds, like as a teenager, everything was handcrafted. So over time, there's more generative tools, and they're like different, in video games, design philosophies. So like one philosophy would be called like a total open world. So you develop tools to make things completely generative, but sometimes then you'd lose like a strong artistic vision. But on the other side, there's like an entry for you to just put whatever of yourself you want within it. So my whole thing is like balancing between generative tools. So each thing I make, like I might have 2,000 photographs of a plant, and then I use a generative, algorithm and tool and AI to turn that into a 3D object. But then after that, by hand, modify that again. So there's like this balance of how far do you go full on a generative algorithm and down that lane, and how far do you have your memories and your original references of the city of your kind of the imprints from reality that you're including into that algorithm, whatever tool it is you're using in that way. So generally speaking, right now I find this to be a very interesting point, like how do you remain in your body or emotional, imaginative, while having generative tools as well? And what parts of being human and in your existence are you continuating? Which ones are you removing from how you sense, talk, speak, share, and so on? So that's how I look at the, yeah.
Can I say something? I think in the sense of humanity, that's great. I love the topic or the idea of having balance in everything we do. But I'm more so thinking about generative art in a useful way for humanity as a whole, like imagining using these applications or this acceleration of artificial intelligence tools that provide us with support for art or for research to be used for things that are very urgent right now. Like we know climate change, and we know like the many things that we need to take care about right now. So I believe, in one sense, I believe in acceleration of the systems and teaching more people how to do it. But on the other, obviously, we have to take care of ourselves and keep balance and don't get lost in these systems, because our bodies are still not used to it. I myself fell into that. I was like sitting on the computer for long periods of time, sometimes 16 hours a day, and I almost like I knew that that was affecting my body and that was affecting my sense of self. So I had to step out and like trying to balance it out. But I learned a lot during that time. Learned so much in like 6 months. So I imagine that many people doing that for the next 10 years. I love the concept of music that you used to. I think we can create, I think everything that we do with rhythm, we can make it work. That's like a philosophy I believe in too. When I create art, for example, like I can see patterns moving and they have sound, even if they're silent. And I know which beat it's using, and I know how to apply it to different instruments I use in my work. So that should be all a combination of what we do in life, like the same way we walk, the same way we learn. We have just to do it with rhythm.
This is a really great conclusion. It brings me to my very last question. The late Dan Graham always said we can only understand the practice of an artist if we also know what kind of music they are listening to. So my last question is, what kind of music are you listening to, both of you?
Everything. But my favorite artist, actually internet artist, I would say, is Arca right now. This is like a fantastic artist.
You collaborate, no?
We collaborated, yes.
What do you do together?
We created like this immersive instrument called Bell that we showed in Berghain in Berlin. It's like a living. Basically, I created. I think sound is the most interesting space in technology right now. Then it's very underexplored. And together, yeah, we made like a living instrument from a swamp, and Arca was singing different verses to it. Yeah, I think Arca's not only a great musician, but also maybe the most interesting to me internet artist.
I love Arca. She's awesome. They're awesome. I think one of my favorite artists right now is Niels Fram and Hania Rani. Like they both together. It's like if you see a video of Hania Rani playing piano, she doesn't stop. She goes for like 2 hours. And she has 3 pianos around her. And it's the same thing that Niels Fram does. And I think it's an interesting way that their brain works. They are just so, maybe they have so much in their mind, they have the rhythm running, or they're counting notes all the time, and that's the only way to calm it down, to keep playing nonstop until they're tired enough. I just think I admire that a lot. I watch that to relax and also to understand like the efforts that a musician can do to just live with themselves and their mind running constantly. And I can relate to.
I think we like the same music.
Amazing.
I didn't know, but now we know.
Yeah, I'm so grateful to you all for being here with us. So grateful to the Serpentine CEO, Bettina Korek. And Bettina and I are deeply grateful to Kathleen and Arthur and to Tezos, to the Tezos team. Of course, as I mentioned in the introduction, deeply grateful to the Serpentine's technology team, also to Octavia Stein and Nico Smirnov from the Serpentine who are here with us. And of course, all our thanks go to the amazing Itzel and Jacob. Thank you so much. A big round of applause.